Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everyone. In honor of our election coming up on November 5th, we thought that we would visit some political films that have been near and dear to our hearts. Some of them are popular-ish, but a lot of them are kind of obscure. So we're hoping that we'll find something new for your weekend movie list. And we also want to encourage everybody to
get out and vote.
Vote, baby,
yes.
Vote.
Get out there. Exercise your right.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
I have to say, this is sort of a little disclaimer. For me personally, the two best political movies of all time are Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and All the King's Men.
Okay.
But we have talked about both of those movies.
Yes, we have.
Quite a bit on the show. In fact, we featured it on the 1940s film. We featured All the King's Men. So we're not going to talk about those two today, but I had to go on record saying they're the two greatest political movies, in my opinion, of all time.
Yes. And there were some others, too, that almost made my list. We do have, each of us have what we're calling a modern classic that we are going to talk about. And of course, during the late 60s and throughout the 70s, that decade really had a ton of political films because of the multiple assassinations and Watergate.
The Watergate, I think, break-in really ramped up the genre.
I mean, is there a better film than All the President's Men from that time frame?
So good.
No, So, all right, I want you to go first.
All right. Well, you know what? My first political film, and it's one, I saw it when I was really young, maybe 12 or 13 years old.
Really?
Yeah, I saw it really, really early. And doing research for this episode, I tried to find it. I had a really hard time finding a copy of this movie.
Okay.
So I wish I could tell you where you could go to see it, but I'm not quite sure because I had trouble. But the movie is, and it's a really good movie, it's called Gabriel Over the White House. It's a pre-code movie from 1933 that was directed by Gregory LaCava, who was, interestingly enough, was mostly known as a comedy director.
Yes.
He did My Man Godfrey, he did Stage Door. The movie was written by Carrie Wilson and Bertram Bloch, and it was produced by Walter Wanger, who we've talked about various times when we talk about Joan Bennett.
Right.
But it's based on a novel, Reinhard, a melodrama of the 1930s, which was by Thomas Frederick Tweed, and it was released March 31st, 1933. As I mentioned, it's a pre-code political fantasy film, which was partially financed by newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which is really interesting. And from what I've read, Hearst was actually instrumental in developing the project, and he even wrote some of the dialogue for it. He was a really kind of hands-on but uncredited producer on this. It's a great story. It's the story of this newly elected U.S. president. He's a bachelor, Judson Judd Hammond. The president got into power because of the corrupt and powerful party bosses who pushed him into the office. So President Hammond is sort of beholden to these crooked political bosses and their agenda. Hammond also is deeply influenced by Jasper Brooks, played by Arthur Byron, who's his corrupt campaign manager, but he also then names him Secretary of State once he gets elected. And there's a moment after the president's elected when Brooks tells him something, and this is one of the greatest lines from the movie, and I think it's really says a lot about the politics of the day. He said to him, "By the time you realize you're not going to enact any of your campaign promises, your term will be over."
Oh, gosh.
Anything to get elected.
Yep.
Yeah, which sometimes still is relevant.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, under Brooks's negative influence, the president turns a blind eye to the concerns of the people, which includes unemployment and racketeering and hunger and national debt, all these horrible things he just doesn't really deal with. He also ignores the protests of John Bronson, played by David Landau, and his army of the unemployed, who want to march on Washington and protest what's going on. Working with the president are his official secretary, Harley Beekman, played by French Otone, and his personal secretary, Pindola Malloy, played by Karen Morley. Now, these two are really important characters because they're two idealistic government workers who really encourage the president to use his power for good. But this often falls on deaf ears because the president's deeply in bed with these political bosses who are corrupt, so there's not a lot he can do. However, everything changes, and the president really changes his attitude and his commitment to the people after he's involved in a terrible car crash where he almost dies and he's plunged into this life-threatening coma. And while he's in this coma, he has this epiphany. And he's visited by this light. And the light is, we come to find out, is possibly the Archangel Gabriel. And this celestial visit really transforms President Hammond into a fearless champion of social justice. And he develops this really fierce resolve to address the problems of the country. So 180. He's done a 180, and this is much to the surprise and the happiness of Beekman and Pendola, who've also fallen in love by the way.
I was just going to say, where's the romance?
There's got to be a love story here. So, of course, the two assistants have fallen in love.
Right.
Well, the president now has this new lease on life. He's suddenly energized in his effort to help the people. He goes on this rampage to try to fix everything that's wrong with the country. He allows John Bronson and his army to march on Washington and protest. He goes head-to-head with this notorious bootlegger and racketeer guy, and he takes down his corrupt cabinet, the whole time finding new and creative solutions to help solve the ills of the country. It's a really inspiring and magical movie that mixes politics with fantasy. It was designed to be this pro-Franklin Roosevelt movie with Houston's president, Hammond, being a substitute for the rash, energetic Roosevelt.
Okay.
However, according to Turner Classic Movies, modern sources have uncovered the fact that Louis B. Mayer, who was the head of the studio, did not see the script before filming, and being a staunch Republican and supporter of Herbert Hoover, held the film back until after the inauguration of President Roosevelt on March 4th.
Okay.
So even politics get involved in the movies.
In the studios, yep.
But it's a great movie. If you ever get a chance to see it, I don't know where you find it, but good luck.
You know what? TCM needs to resurrect that.
Yeah, they really should.
Especially with the election coming up. And I'm sure they're all listening. So... Well, let me dive in with my first film. It's called Salt of the Earth. It's 1954, directed by Herbert J. Biberman, written by Michael Wilson. This is a new film to me, but I was just so intrigued when I started reading about it, and it is available, I think I saw it maybe even on YouTube. It's a controversial neo-realist film. It's based on the true events of a 1951 strike in New Mexico against the Empire Zinc Company. In the film, Mexican-American women take over a picket line when their husbands are banned. Their husbands are the mining workers, are banned from participating. Co-producer Paul Jericho called the film unequivocally pro-labor, pro-minority, and pro-women, which I of course love. Biberman, Wilson, who was the writer, and Jericho, as I mentioned, the producer, were part of the blacklisted 10, the original 10. And so after being jailed for 6 months, Biberman, Wilson, and Jericho, and the composer Saul Kaplan, they made the film largely in retaliation for being blacklisted. It was almost like they were saying, you know what, if we're going to get blacklisted for something, let's make a film to actually kind of, exacerbate what they said to fit the crime, essentially.
And maybe the big F-U, too.
Yeah, exactly. This movie, from my research, is the only blacklisted film ever in American film history.
Oh, wow.
And, of course, it was at the height of the McCarthy scourge. It was also one of the first independent films made outside of the studio system. In fact, after this film was released, some say while it was being shot, this happened. The lead actress, Rosaura Revueltas, who plays Esperanza Quintero, she was a noted screen actress in her native Mexico. She was accused of being a communist and deported.
Oh, no.
She never made another American film.
Wow.
Yeah, and she's beautiful and wonderful in this. Biberman originally intended for the lead female role to be played by his wife, actress Gail Sondergaard, who this podcast loves, but they opted to have a genuine Latina actor play it, thank God.
Yeah.
The filmmakers actually went to the community and listened to the true story of the miners. Screenwriter Wilson drafted out the script, and then as a community, they had a chance to suggest changes to it.
Oh, wow.
The film also stars Will Geer as the sheriff,
That's right, yeah.
David Bauer as Barton, But most of the film is our non-professional cast, including Juan Chacon, who plays Ramon Quintera. He was the actual union local president of the miners' union. It includes members of the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers, Local 890. They were part of the original strike that the story is based upon, and so they're in this film as well. There were numerous attempts to stop the film from being made and suppress it after it was completed. Now, this is fascinating to me. Lest you think that this suppression of the film is because there's some kind of repugnant and deplorable imagery in the film or some other controversial thing. The whole controversy springs from its characters expressing their desire to have things like running water.
Oh, no.
Indoor bathrooms, like the white workers.
Wow.
Safe working conditions, and the same wages as white workers. These were American citizens.
Wow.
And they were being treated like that.
And the fact that that was the controversy.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah. I just want to leave you with one quote from the character of Esperanza. She says,
"Whose neck shall I stand on to make me feel superior, and what will I have out of it? I don't want anything lower than I am. I am low enough already. I want to rise and to push everything up with me as I go."
Wow.
Yeah, this is a great film. If you haven't seen it, it's a must-see.
Yeah.
Especially in our times.
I know. It's definitely on my list. I've never seen it. I've always heard about it. I know it's an important movie about labor and politics.
Yeah.
But now, based on your report,
yeah.
I
you know, some of the acting, there's a lot of non-professional actors, but the message of the film is powerful enough for me to overlook that.
Yeah, good one.
All right, what you got?
Well, my next film is a film from 1940. It's called The Great McGinty.
Oh.
I love The Great McGinty. And it's actually the very first film ever directed by Preston Sturges.
Really?
Yeah, it was his very first film.
Okay.
Of course, we all know Preston Sturges would go on to direct such classic screwball comedies like The Lady E from 41 and Sullivan's Travels and The Palm Beach Story and The Miracle of Morgan's Creek. He was primarily a writer, but he wanted to direct, so he ended up writing the screenplay for this, The Great McGinty, and offered to sell it to Paramount for $10.
No.
But they had to let him direct.
How
was
smart
the deal.
was he?
Very smart. Well, they agreed to it, and it ended up being a great decision because the movie was a big box office champ, and it won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay.
Oh, wow.
So it all worked out really well.
It did.
It was released August 15th, 1940, and the story starts with a bartender named Dan McGinty, played by the great Brian Donlevy, who I love. He's in a smoky bar in some Banana Republic country, probably in South America, and at the bar, he prevents this despondent American soldier from killing himself.
Oh.
He then tries to make the guy feel better by telling him about his sad life.
Okay.
And how he got to, he ended up a bartender in a sleazy bar somewhere in South America.
Right.
So the movie's told in flashbacks. It's Dan McGinty talking about how he got to where he is.
Okay.
Dan is this extremely engaging and charming guy, and as he starts the movie in flashback, he's this two-bit street hustler who helps out this local mayor cheat in his election by voting a total of 37 times at various polling places. And his tenacity catches the eye of the big gang boss who controls the election.
Okay.
He's played by that great character actor, Akim Tamiroff.
Okay.
And if you don't know him, look him up. He's such a great actor. Well, Dan and the gang boss, who is never given a name in this movie, by the way, he's just known as the gang boss. Well, they have this very complicated, tumultuous relationship, and they often come to blows with each other. But soon, Dan becomes one of the gang boss's enforcers, and then his political protege. And then finally, the gang boss has him run for mayor himself. So he goes from two-bit hustler to mayor of this town, like pretty quickly, all because of corruption and all this.
Yes.
Well, the boss tells Dan that in order to be mayor, he has to be married. So he accepts this very sincere proposal from the gang boss's secretary, Catherine, played by Muriel Angelis, who really loves him, but he sees it as a marriage of convenience at first. Well, the newly elected mayor, he continues to carry out the gang boss's political corruption. He rationalizes, though, that the public still benefits from the public works that he's getting done, no matter who's bribing their way into profiting from it. So he's finding a way to justify his corrupt actions. He also is starting to get influenced by his more idealistic and good wife. You know, she really doesn't really know a lot about the corruption and the negative things going on.
Right.
She really just wants him to do a good job and be there for the people. And he's starting to be influenced by that. He begins to take public service a little more seriously, even though he knows that he can't go against the gang boss too much. Well, as Dan gets further along in his misdealings with this gang boss, he soon finds himself elected governor. You can only fail up in the corrupt world of gang bosses. And he has a real change of heart at that point. And it's all thanks to his wife and his children. He decides to turn his back on the gang boss and to try to do the right thing as governor. However, he finds it's not so easy to go straight. Which is what the movie's really, really about. And I don't want to give too much away about the plot, but, eventually we learn how Dan ended up at this bar down in South America. And so much of the film is about the awakening of Dan's consciousness and the power of love and how it set him straight to do the right thing. Great themes all around. Allegedly, Sturgis loosely based the screenplay on William Sulzer, who was an impeached governor of New York back in 1913.
Okay.
And one of the cool things about this film is that in the beginning of it, Preston Sturgis starts to gather his repertoire of actors, which he would use over and over and over in many, many movies, including William Demarest, Jimmy Conlon, Esther Howard, Thurston Hall, and the great Robert Warwick. Love these people. Love his entourage.
Yes.
This was the final film of actress Muriel Angelis. She left movies for Broadway after completing work on this movie before retiring completely in 1946, which is really a pity because she's really quite wonderful and I think could have had a major career, but for whatever reason she retired early. And another really fun fact about this movie, and it's a little wink to the audience by Preston Sturgis, in his 1944 comedy, The Miracle of Morgan Creek, he has Brian Dunleavy and Akeem Tamaroff recreate the same characters. Oh. And they're in a very funny scene where they have to issue a marriage license. I love this movie. Really wonderful. All about the power of love and doing the right thing.
Doing the right thing.
Yeah. And you can catch this one, I think, on a lot of streaming services.
Okay.
Like Apple Plus and places like that.
My next film is The Best Man, 1964, directed by Franklin J. Schaffner, written by Gore Vidal, and based on his play of the same name. Now, the play ran on Broadway for 520 performances.
Wow.
1960 and 1961, with Melvin Douglas in the lead. It was then revived on Broadway in 2012. Director Schaffner, as you know, would go on to win the Academy Award as Best Director for Patton in 1970. But this film has been described as a Cold War doomsday thriller. A thriller seems a little... I wouldn't call it a thriller.
I don't think I'd call it a thriller either.
Yeah.
Great movie, but not
It's a great film.
Yeah.
Perhaps what they're referring to is it does take place over 2 days, and there's a lot that goes on. The story follows two political candidates, the ethical former Secretary of State William Russell, played by Henry Fonda, and the more ruthless and conniving Senator Joe Cantwell, played by Cliff Robertson. So these two are front runners for the party's presidential nomination, and they're vying for the ailing former president's endorsement. Art Hochstetter, and that is played by Lee Tracy, who is reprising his role from the Broadway production. Yeah. And he actually garnered an Oscar nomination for his performance.
Sure did.
So each candidate has dirt on the other one. And the moral question of the movie essentially is, will they use that dirt to get the nomination?
Yeah.
So writer Vidal was quoted as saying that he saw the film as addressing the need for politicians to appear to be all things to an awful lot of people. And it sort of goes to what you were talking about in one of your film choices. How do you actually do good? It can be harder to do good. It's also been cited as the first movie to include the word homosexual. It's a great cast. It also features Edie Adams as Cliff Robertson's wife, Mabel, Margaret Leighton as Henry Fonda's wife, Alice.
She's great.
Ann Southern is in it as this busybody women's reporter.
Love that character.
And then Shelley Berman has a key role. He's
kind of the comic relief, don't you think?
He's the comic relief, but he's also sleazy and
But it's sort of a pivotal moment, and he really does this comical thing, which is a little out of character, but it so works.
Yes, it does work. I won't give away what that is, but Kevin McCarthy, who I'm sure when you see his face, if you don't know his name, he's in it as well. And then they do
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Oh,
Yes, he's the guy.
They also do cameos of actual people. Mahalia Jackson sings, Howard K. Smith plays the role, and This is one that I was so proud of myself for being able to pick out. The cleaning lady in the hotel room is played by our dear Marie Blake, a.k.a. Blossom Rock,
Yes.
our grandmama from the Addams Family, who we've mentioned on this podcast numerous times. Yes. Here's one of these quotes that just stuck out for me from the screenplay. Anything more indecent than the human face when it smiles? All those predatory teeth reminding us of our animal descent. And that's Henry Fonda referring to everybody putting on a smile and trying to get what they want. And other lines like, time was, you rich boys like to play games like polo. Now you play politics.
Yeah.
So it's a really cynical movie, but it has some dark comic moments as well as the backdrop of the tension of this convention. And who's going to win? Who's actually going to win? And it has a surprise ending.
Yes, it does.
It's a look at politics in America that actually isn't so far from where we are 60 years later.
No, it's so relevant today, I think, watching that movie.
Yeah, and you can find that one. It's available on streaming. Well, nothing's free on streaming, but you don't have to buy it. You don't have to rent it.
Oh, what a good movie choice. I love that movie.
I think before we dive into the next 4 that we have left to talk about, what's this week's Hollywood pop quiz?
The pop quiz question of the week is, what was the first movie to ever have the credit written and directed by all together?
Right, as opposed to written by, directed by.
A different, yes.
Well, we'll be right back with the answer and more films of the political genre after this.
All right, Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. In the Heat of the Night, starring Sidney Poitier and Rod Steiger, was released in 1967. It depicted a tough, edgy vision of a southern town that seemed to hate outsiders more than itself, just as the civil rights movement attempted to take hold. At the 40th Academy Awards, the film was nominated for 7 Oscars, winning 5, including Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Actor for Rod Steiger. Perhaps the most remembered line in the film is Poitier's famous, "They call me Mr. Tibbs." But here's something you may not have known about the film. It's important for being the first major Hollywood film in color that was lit with proper consideration for a black actor. You see, Haskell Wexler, the film's cinematographer, recognized that standard strong lighting used in filming tended to produce too much glare on dark complexions, and it often rendered black actors' features as indistinct. So Wexler adjusted the lighting to feature Poitier with better photographic results and created a whole new standard for others to follow. And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. We're in the middle of our political films in honor of the election coming up November the 5th. But before we get into more choices, I just wanted to give a shout out to our listener of the week. And this week, we honor Tracy Kuiper Polk. Tracy, you've been such a great supporter. You've emailed us, you've supported us, you like things, you share things. We really appreciate you, and you are our listener of the week.
Thank you, Tracy.
All right, my next movie, and this is one that I really love, and it's from 1958, and it's called The Last Hurrah.
Oh,
Great
good
movie.
choice.
Directed by John Ford, written by Frank S. Nugent, based on the 1956 novel by Edwin O'Connor. It was released November of 1958, and it basically tells the story of Frank Skeffington, who's played by the great Spencer Tracy. He's this tough but fair Irish-American mayor of this unnamed New England city. He's a seasoned politician. He definitely knows what he's doing. He knows how it works. This is his 5th election. He's running for mayor for the 5th and final time. Only now, Skeffington has to deal with the rumors of misconduct and his abuse of power, which causes him to kind of make some enemies with some of the town's more powerful men, including this Protestant bishop, a newspaper publisher, a banker, and also a Catholic cardinal played by Donald Crisp, who was Skeffington's childhood friend.
Okay.
So he's got all the bigwigs in town that are sort of against him. So what this disgruntled group does, they decide to run their own candidate for mayor, and so they pick this young, inexperienced lawyer who was a war hero but has no political experience whatsoever as the candidate to oppose Skeffington. And this guy is Kevin McCluskey, and he's played by Charles B. Fitzsimmons, who in real life, he's the brother of actress Maureen O'Hara.
Oh my goodness.
I think he's also in How Green Was My Valley as one of the brothers. Really good actor, really underrated. But he plays the squeaky clean guy that they're running against him. Well, Skeffington's nephew, Adam Caulfield, is played by Jeffrey Hunter, and he's this idealistic newspaper man who decides to follow the campaign and report on it. And it turns out to be this no-holds-bar, really acrimonious, election, dirty, dramatic,
Yeah.
you name it. You can imagine. Well, Caulfield's wife, who's played by Diane Foster, she's the daughter of one of those powerful businessmen who opposes Skeffington. So that causes tension in their marriage.
Okay.
All kinds of craziness. But as this political drama unfolds, Skeffington has this opportunity to really take a hard look at his tactics and his actions over the past several years as mayor. The campaign has become his last hurrah, hence the title, and it teaches him so much about himself. Not to give too much away, but the campaign is brutal, it's hard fought, and it changes Skeffington forever. It's really interesting to watch his journey and his trajectory throughout this movie. Along the way, he tries to get the attention of his kind of cool son, who's too busy out dancing and drinking and carousing with women to really pay any attention to his father or to even vote. And it's a real...
Shame on him.
Yeah, I know. It's a very heartbreaking relationship in the movie. And one of the fun things to watch out for this movie is the appearance of Ken Curtis, who we all know who played Festus on Gunsmoke. He plays a priest, and it's so un-Festus-like that for a minute you're like, is that Festus as a priest? It's kind of fun. The movie was well received by critics, but it didn't do much business at the box office. In fact, it ended up losing about $1 million. So it was definitely not a box office success. You know, it received no Oscar nominations, except Spencer Tracy did win Best Actor and John Ford won Best Director at the National Board of Review.
Okay.
And Tracy was also nominated for a BAFTA award. But that's about it for the awards. It's a really great movie. It really tells you a lot about the life of a politician. And you can stream it anywhere. I think YouTube, Fandango, Apple, Amazon Prime.
Nice.
You can find that one almost anywhere.
Oh, I'm going to have a lot of movies to watch.
Yes.
All right. My next one is what TCM is calling modern classics. And we've adopted that phrase as well.
Yeah.
This is my modern classic, but it was 50 years ago.
Wow.
The Parallax View, directed by Alan J. Pakula.
Oh, good choice.
I just love this movie.
Me
it's
too.
written by David Giler, who wrote Alien in 1986, and Lorenzo Semple Jr., who wrote 3 Days of the Condor.
Which is actually my next movie.
Oh, little teaser there.
Yeah.
It's based on the novel by Lauren Singer, which actually followed witnesses of JFK's assassination. And you can see the obvious parallels in the film between that and also RFK's assassination. Some call this film part of the trilogy of thrillers that Pakula did, including All the President's Men and Clute. And as we were saying earlier, the 70s just was chock full of conspiracy films. What's really surprising to me, you mentioned awards. This film was not nominated for any Academy Awards, which when you look at it, it's
surprising.
It's really surprising. Yeah. And maybe it was ahead of its time.
Yeah.
The film begins on the 4th of July in Seattle, Washington at the Space Needle. And what a great place to start a film. A campaign event is underway for a candidate for president, Senator Charles Carroll. And while he's at the top of the Space Needle, this happens right at the top, so I'm not giving anything away. The senator is assassinated. And all the people who witnessed the assassination, let me just say they start to have some problems. Breathing problems.
Well said, without giving too much away.
Now, there's an ambitious reporter, Joe Frady, played by Warren Beatty, who begins investigating the strange things that are happening at the insistence of his former love interest, who's TV news personality, Lee Carter, who's played by Paula Prentice.
Love her.
Oh my
Love her.
Gosh,
She's
when
so
you
good in this movie,
see her
too.
in this movie, she should have been nominated for Best Supporting Actress.
She's so good.
She's only in 2 scenes, 15 minutes of the film, but she is so good.
Yeah.
Her convincing him gets him in a conspiracy way over his head involving the Parallx Corporation, which is essentially a training institute for killers. He decides to enroll in the institute to uncover the truth. This film is so tautly directed from the opening frames. You just feel like you know something's going to happen. And even when something happens, it continues to unfold. The score, the camera movement, it just doesn't let up. There's a scene that fast forwards from the assassination attempt 3 years later, and there's this slow camera trucking in on this government committee, saying the assassin acted alone. I mean, it just resonates with everything that has happened in our country.
Yeah.
After that is when we meet Warren Beatty's character in earnest and really get to know him. This is one of Warren's, can I call him Warren?
I think so.
I love calling him Warren. It's one of his best performances. You completely buy him as this creatively irresponsible reporter, as his boss, played by Hume Cronin, calls him, who, by the way, is also fantastic. I think in general, Warren Beatty is such an underrated actor, and I think it's because he is so effortless in what he does, and he's so yummy.
So, agree 1,000%.
He's just so yummy.
Underrated and yummy.
Yes. There's some inventive camera work, too, that takes place at Griffith Park in the train scene that goes around. And Pakula, just keeps the camera at a distance, but you can hear this wonderful scene between Kenneth Mars and Warren Beatty. I don't want to give away anything more about the plot. As I said, it's going to keep you guessing. It has a really dark underbelly to it and a lot of eeriness. And the final frames of this film, they leave me so breathless every time I watch it, and it's not because I'm looking at Warren Beatty's backside. It's just complete. Well, maybe it's partly. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's both. Pakula himself described the picture as a sort of an American myth based on some things that have happened, some fantasies we may have had of what might have happened, and a lot of fears a lot of us have had. So he even said that the Parallx View was a whole other kind of filmmaking for him.
Wow, I love that.
The only other thing I want to mention about this film is that within the film, there is a 4.5-minute film. There's a film within the film that Steven Soderbergh argues is the best film within a film anybody's ever created. And, really kind of talks about it being, it's pretty deranged, the film within a film.
It totally is.
But beautifully shot.
It's mind-blowing film.
This film you can find right now streaming as well. Yeah.
Great choice.
Thank you.
For my final film,
yes.
I'm going full-blown political thriller.
Okay.
And I'm also going modern classic.
Nice.
And
I love this.
It's 3 Days of the Condor.
I love this movie. Great choice.
Love this movie. 1975, directed by Sidney Pollack. It was also written by, you just mentioned, Lorenzo Semple Jr. and David Rayfield. It's based on the 1974 novel called 6 Days of the Condor.
Oh, really? They reduced it, huh?
They knocked off 3 days for the movie.
They wanted the movie to be 2 hours instead of 3.
And that novel was by James Grady. It was released September 25th, 1975, and it is a thriller that will just leave you breathless and gobsmacked. Mm-hmm. There's no other way to say it. Mm-hmm. It's really this brilliant film that takes place in New York City and Washington, D.C., and it centers around this relatively low-level CIA agent named Joe Turner, played by the great and effortless Robert Redford.
Yeah, speaking of gorgeous and effortless.
Exactly. And he and his research team, they work under the guise of the Literary Historical Society, which is a made-up front. What they actually do is they read books and newspapers and magazines from around the world to compare them to actual operations and to find hidden messages or secret codes within the text. Mm-hmm. They're basically bookworms.
Right.
They're not really...
They're not out with guns running around the streets.
They're not that kind of CIA. Yeah. They're definitely the more erudite CIA people.
Right.
Well, Turner files a report to the headquarters of the CIA on this thriller novel that he found with these strange plot elements. And despite poor sales of this novel, it ends up getting translated into all of these various Middle Eastern languages, which he thinks, it raises his suspicion, and he thinks it might be a code for something, so he lets the headquarters know. Well, shortly after filing his report, Joe Turner leaves the office through a back exit, which is important, because he's been sent to get lunch for the office.
Yeah. It's his turn.
Yeah, it's his turn. So he goes, he leaves in a back way, he's undetected, and while he's gone, these assassins come into the office and murder every single coworker that was in there.
And that scene is just, it's at the top of the film.
Harrowing.
So
And included in the carnage is Janice Chon, played by Tina Chen, who was Turner's girlfriend. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely personal.
Yes.
Well, when Turner returns and finds this bloody mess, he freaks out, he grabs a gun, and he runs. He calls the CIA headquarters, he tells them what happened, and the CIA chief Higgins, played by Cliff Robertson, who's also in your movie, tells Turner to meet Agent Wicks, played by Michael Caine, not the Michael Caine we all know, but Kane, in an alley so that Agent Wicks can take him in for protection. Well, by now, Turner is very suspicious of everything and everybody, and he tells Higgins, I don't know you, I've never met you, I don't know Wicks, I've never met Wicks. How do I know this is real? Well, Higgins says, you know what? To make you feel comfortable, we'll bring along somebody that you do know, and that is his buddy Sam Barber, who Joe went to college with and who also works in a low-level CIA capacity. So when the men show up at the alley, Sam Barber's there, so Turner feels comfortable, but then all of a sudden Wicks jumps out and tries to kill Joe Turner. But Joe is able to avoid being killed and ends up shooting Wicks himself. Well, before Wicks falls, he basically assassinates Sam Barber because he doesn't want to leave any witnesses behind, and Turner takes off from the alley and flees. It's a harrowing scene. It's crazy. Well, Wicks is then taken to the hospital where he tells the CIA that it was Joe who turned on him and killed Sam. So now Robert Redford is
He's on the run.
He's on the run. He's a wanted man. Well, Joe goes to another colleague's apartment for help, but he finds out that he's also been murdered at his apartment. So every single person in his department is now dead. He then goes home where his landlady inadvertently tells him that there's two men waiting for him up in his apartment, which of course he knows is what that means.
Right.
And so he flees and he realizes he's being followed. So he ducks inside this ski shop where he meets Kathy Hale, played by the wonderful Faye Dunaway in full-blown movie star regala.
Yes.
Just incredible. And she's just basically this innocent woman buying skis for her ski vacation with her boyfriend in Vermont.
Right.
Well, Joe needs a cover and he needs some place to hide out. So he decides Kathy is the ticket. So he basically takes her hostage, forces her into her car, and forces her to take him back to her apartment in Brooklyn so he can hide out, regroup, come up with a plan.
Right.
Because shit's getting real.
Yeah.
Well, Joe ends up tying up Kathy and he heads over to his friend Sam Barber's apartment, where Sam's wife, played by the always wonderful Carlin Glenn, is preparing dinner. She has no idea what's happened. She has no idea that Sam's dead. He tells her that she's got to get out of the apartment and not to come back, which she does, because basically he saves her life, because I'm sure they were headed over there to get her.
To get her.
So as he's leaving the apartment building, and this is one of the greatest moments in this film, there's a hired assassin named Jobert, played with creepy perfection by Max von Sydow.
Oh, he's so good.
He's so good in this movie. Well, he ends up getting in the elevator with Joe, with all these other people. And so Joe has to outmaneuver this assassin without getting innocent people in the elevator killed.
Yes.
It's such a harrowing, tense scene, and it's so well done. But anyway, he ends up getting away from Jobert, but only before Jobert gets the license plate of Kathy's car, which of course leads him back to Kathy's apartment.
Yeah.
Well, now he knows where Kathy lives, he knows where Joe's likely hiding, and he sends an assassin dressed like a mailman to take care of him. But Joe Turner is able to take out the assassin, and he and Kathy flee. And I don't want to give too much more away about the plot, but the rest of the movie is this incredible game of cat and mouse between Joe and the CIA operatives. And it's thrilling, it's exciting. You never really know who the good guys are, you never really know who the bad guys are. There's plot twist after plot twist. It will leave you breathless.
Yeah.
The ending is very cool and very ambiguous, which is actually apropos to the movie because the whole time as a viewer, we're off kilter. We don't know who to trust.
Yes.
We don't know what's what. So it's kind of perfect
such a great
that
film.
they leave the movie sort of up in the air. This post-Watergate film, it really tapped into our collective distrust of the government. And I think that's why this movie was so successful. And it was a huge box office success. The critics loved it. However, its only Oscar nomination was for Best Editing, which
that's
really
interesting.
surprises me.
Yeah.
Faye Dunaway did get nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Drama, but surprisingly, Robert Redford, who is absolutely terrific in this
he's
film,
fabulous.
was not nominated.
Yeah. I think he's another one that people just sort of take him for granted because he's
so good looking
nice to look at.
and makes it look so easy that they don't think he's working hard.
And he's interesting too because he has chosen over his career a lot of political films. I mean, that one, The Candidate.
Oh, The Candidate, which is
The
good.
President's Men, of course. I mean, so
great.
Yeah, that's a great choice. The way you described it, I want to watch it again tonight.
Oh, it's so good. Well, one, I'm going to end on this, and it's really funny to me anyway. I think some people will get it. But there's one really fun note about this movie. Jobert gives this speech to Turner about how he might be killed if the CIA end up coming after him.
Okay.
And it's very elegant and very well spoken about how he's going to be killed. How it's going to go down. Yes. Well, they use this speech almost word for word in an episode of Seinfeld.
Are you kidding me?
They did, called the junk mail. And it's a speech that's used as a warning from Newman to Kramer about how the U.S. Postal Service will retaliate for Kramer's refusal to receive his mail.
Okay, that is hysterical.
And it works so perfectly.
That is so funny, especially because that mailman dresses up to try to kill Robert Redford.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
So check that out.
Okay.
If you want to see that Seinfeld episode.
Well, I want to have us end on a little more innocent of a time, even though it wasn't so innocent. Abe Lincoln in Illinois, 1940.
Oh.
This is directed by John Cromwell, written by Robert E. Sherwood, who wrote the Pulitzer Prize-winning play, and Grover Jones. John Cromwell, we know, is known for directing Algiers, The Prisoner of Zenda, Anna and the King of Siam. This is all kind of, they're all connected, everything's connected. And he is the father to actor James Cromwell.
That's right.
As you may have guessed from the title, it's the story of Abraham Lincoln, played by Raymond Massey, but it's not from the perspective of his presidency. It begins with his early days in the backwoods of Kentucky, chronicles his life running livestock to New Orleans. There's a great scene involving pigs. Who doesn't love a good pig scene? It moves to when he settles in New Salem. He falls in love with Anne Rutledge, played by Mary Howard, who's already engaged to someone else. He starts running the local store. He becomes the postmaster, and his popularity in the community and his reputation for fairness basically gets him elected to the state legislature. He later goes to Springfield. He becomes a lawyer, and he eventually meets Mary Todd, played by none other than Ruth Gordon.
Yes.
Who we know from history books. He marries. He becomes a congressman and is elected president in 1860 and departs for Washington, and that's the end of the film when he's heading for Washington. Now, Canadian Raymond Massey was nominated for an Academy Award for this performance. He actually played Abe Lincoln 5 different times, twice on film, twice on television, and he originated the role on Broadway. I just have to mention some of the other cast members. Howard Da Silva plays Jack Armstrong. You'll know Howard Da Silva from
him.
so much television.
So great.
But when you start deep diving him, we should really do an episode on him. I mean, he starts off as this bully, and then he becomes a big champion of Lincoln's. But he originated the role of Judd Fry in Oklahoma, originated it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And Benjamin Franklin in 1776 in the film and on stage.
Oh, wow.
He was a victim of the blacklist as well.
Yes.
He also originated the role he plays in this film in the Broadway version. And the great Gene Lockhart, who I just love.
I love him.
Who is not from England, who's from Canada. He plays Stephen A. Douglas, the political opponent to Abe. He's been in over 125 films. He was nominated for an Academy Award for Algiers. But can we just talk about Ruth Gordon for a second?
Yes.
So this is, my jaw was like, well, what? This is her first credited film. You know, she had been on Broadway in the 30s, and we all know her from Harold and Maude and Rosemary's Baby. This is a whole nother Ruth. I mean, she has a surprising physical resemblance to Mary Todd, and she does a terrific job. She and Raymond Massey had worked together in 1936 in the Broadway production of Ethan Frome, Edith Wharton's adaptation of Edith Wharton's novel. And then this was so interesting to me. When Massey was divorcing his second wife, Adrienne Allen, who is an actress, their divorce was the inspiration for Ruth Gordon and her husband, Garson Kanan's script, Adam's Rib.
Yes.
Because they both ended up marrying somebody else. When the film first starts, I have to say, you'll go, what? She recommended this? It has a very silent film style to it. In the beginning, it's shot kind of proscenium. It's almost like they're on a set. It's not very interesting. And the acting is a little stiff. But don't let that stop you from finishing. It's heartwarming. It's inspiring. There are so many wonderful themes that make you realize politics 'twas ever thus.
Yeah.
We know what happens to Abraham Lincoln, but you still feel hopeful for the country with a sense that every generation has had challenges and they still manage to move forward. The screenplay has some really interesting prescient moments that foreshadow his assassination. And there are just some quips and wonderful lines of dialogue about there are always 2 occupations open to those who have failed at everything else, school teaching and politics, which I find so great.
That's hilarious.
And then when he's talking about meeting Mary Todd's family, he says, the Todd family, this is Abraham Lincoln speaking, the Todd family are a mighty high-class best people. They spell their name with 2 Ds, which is pretty impressive when you consider one was enough for God, which I just love. So it's a political film, but it also does have some romance and some heartbreak. Yeah. And of course, there is a huge debate between Massey and as Lincoln and Gene Lockhart as Douglas. They have a great debate for the Senate seat. And when you listen to this debate and watch them, you will think it's 2024.
Wow.
Different issues, but same issues. It's really a history lesson wrapped up in social activism, wrapped up in a love story, wrapped up in where is our moral compass going to be directed. And just one last thing, one of the things that it asks is a serious question about, and I'll just quote it, what is to stop us in future from decreeing all men are created equal except Negroes, foreigners, Catholics, Jews, or just poor people?
Wow.
So it's pretty powerful. And of course, Lincoln's famous line, a house divided against itself cannot stand, is very prominently placed. It's
very pertinent as we go to the polls November the 5th.
It's really pertinent, yeah. The final images of him on the train leaving for Washington, we know that he will return in a casket on the train. Yeah.
Wow, good choice.
This has sort of been bittersweet.
I know, politics.
It's bittersweet, yeah.
Very, very
it's very complicated, but it's been fun.
Yeah, but before we wrap things up, I wanted to give the answer to today's pop quiz. And the question, of course, was, in what movie was the credit written and directed by first introduced? And that was a movie that we just talked about, The Great McGinty.
Wow.
By Preston Sturges.
So cool.
So it started with Preston.
It did. Well, thanks for spending this time with us, everyone. We would love it if you would give us a 5-star review and if you would subscribe and follow us on social media. We have the handle @From Beneath the Hollywood Sign, and you can find us on YouTube where you can watch the podcast, or Instagram and Facebook.
And we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.